So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janice Whitaker, and I'm the Administrator and Community Liaison for the Tressa, Nese, and Helen Diskevich Center of Geriatric Nursing Excellence at the Penn State Nese College of Nursing. It's my pleasure to welcome you to another seminar today. Today we're featuring Speaking Grief Part 2, Self-Care and Wellness in Grief, presented by Dr. Kostorhyz. And before she is introduced and starts her presentation, I want to read a few announcements to you, make a couple of disclosures, and then introduce you to one of our CGNE affiliated PhD students. So first of all, this seminar is being recorded. For those of you that are in the room, please silence your cell phones. Those of you on Zoom, we appreciate it if you stay on mute. If you do want to ask a question aloud or participate in discussion when we get to that part of the seminar, please raise your hand, a little feature that's on the bottom of your screen, and Jenny will unmute you so you can speak aloud. If you use the gallery or thumbnail format, you will see not only the speaker presenting, but the PowerPoint slides as well. If you have any comments, we encourage you to put those into the chat feature. If you have a question, please put that into the Q&A feature, just so we can kind of monitor those a little more easily. The post-event evaluation link will be placed into the chat at the end of the seminar, and it will also be emailed to you automatically based on your registration in Zoom within 24 hours. The evaluation must be completed within a week of the seminar. While this is required for registered nurses seeking contact hours, we do ask that all attendees complete the post-event evaluation. It helps with our data collection, feedback about the seminar, as well as supports our age-friendly care PA initiative. Of note, only 25% of participants from last week completed the evaluation tool. So if everyone could try their best to find an opportunity either at the end of the seminar, we'll give you a few minutes, or sometime tomorrow or within a week to complete the evaluation, we would really appreciate it. Contact hour certificates will be emailed to registered nurses within a month of the session. Penn State Ross and Carroll Nese College of Nursing is an approved provider of nursing continuing professional development by the Pennsylvania State Nurses Association, an accredited provider of the American Nurses Credentialing Center Commission on Accreditation. At this time, presenters, organizers, and content specialists have indicated no conflict of interest. This activity has been submitted for one contact hour for participants who hold a valid RN license, attend the entire session, and complete the evaluation. Partial contact hours are not awarded. This program is being provided by the Penn State College of Nursing's Tressa, Nese, and Helen Diskevich Center of Geriatric Nursing Excellence in collaboration with the Center for Nursing Research and Age-Friendly Care PA, which is funded by HRSA. If you have any questions or need additional information, please feel free to reach out to cgne@psu.edu. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Logan Sweeter, one of our CGNE affiliated PhD students who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Janice. Kostorhyz is a licensed professional counselor and associate teaching professor at the Penn State University in Counselor Education and Rehabilitation and Human Services. Over the past 15 years, she has worked with a range of individuals and families grieving a variety of losses. Dr. Kostorhyz teaches graduate level grief and loss counseling class at Penn State while supervising counselors to enhance their wellness when supporting clients with their losses. Dr. Kostorhyz serves on multiple local and national organizations to encourage individuals and professionals to express and embrace grief in a strength-based holistic model.
Great, thanks, Logan. I'm excited to be here today and to talk with you and to talk not at you, but with you a little bit about the intersectionality of self-care, wellness, and grief and the work that you all do and the work that your students or supervisees do as well. And so I'm excited to be here today. I will share my screen a little bit and would welcome and invite you all to use the chat feature. And also, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand throughout the presentation. And I'm going to share my screen here right now. And so as Logan shared, I work here at Penn State. I have also been a volunteer with hospice for the last almost 20 years, doing in-home visits with individuals who are terminally ill. And so I'm really looking forward to talking with you all today about ways to enhance what you're already doing well, some things that you are already doing in your self-care, and then how can you continue to improve some of those. So these are the objectives that talking with the center, some things that we thought would be helpful today. I think we've heard the terms wellness and self-care. They're thrown around a lot. But what does that mean in your life? What does that mean personally, professionally? And then also, how do we help support our patients in enhancing their wellness through the grief process as well? So we'll look at all of those different aspects. And then objective 2 is looking through this strength-based holistic model. How do we view ourselves? How do we view the individuals we work with in these multiples, identities and cultures, as well as these systems that we reside in? And then we'll walk away today. I have a little interactive activity so you can look at and spend some time reflecting on your own areas of wellness and what are a couple things that you can take away that you're already doing well, and then as well as some things that I can do or try or practice as I'm grieving or supporting others through grief. But I'm really curious, so what do you hope to get out today? So I don't know if people in the chat box want to share that. What is it that brought you to this presentation? What are you hoping to get out of it? And I want to try and infuse that the best I can throughout this, throughout our time together. So what is it that you're looking for is important to us as well today? So if you want to use the chat box to do that. And in the meantime, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm actually going to start us off with 1 minute of mindfulness. We talk about doing it a lot, but are we actually infusing that into our practices? Are we doing that ourselves in team meetings and classes? And so I thought I would just start us off with 1 minute, a little bit of a checking in. But I see Amy in the chat box, increase mindfulness and presence. Yeah, absolutely. So step 1, we showed up today, right? And then how do we arrive in this space and be present and mindful of where we're at? So let's, I'll share my screen and then we'll just do a 1 minute kind of mindfulness activity. And so I'll share this real quick and we'll just take 1 minute to arrive in the space of wherever we are today. So
sitting comfortably, just beginning with a nice big deep breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. So eyes open, a soft focus. As you breathe out, you can allow the breath to return to its natural rhythm. But just keep the eyes open for a moment. Just focusing in on one particular object within your field of vision. Not staring at it too intently, still aware of the space around you. But just gently focusing on that one object. And then just slowly zooming back out again as you blink a few times with the eyes.
okay, so as we arrive in the space that we're in and we're noticing, what are we seeing, activating our senses, what's going on in our thoughts, what do we feel in our bodies, helps us to be present no matter what situation that we're in. And so how do we infuse this into our life? And I see that Nikki just put that in the chat box, everyday life. We know that this is important, yet sometimes it can be really challenging for us to do. So I want you to think of now, so if you were to say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most well I've ever been, and 1 being the least well, where would you put yourself right here, right now? So just think of a scale from 1 to 10. You can put it in the chat box or you can just jot it down. My overall wellness, 10 being the most well I've ever been, 1 being the least well. Where am I right here, right now? And as we think about that, we also want to think about, how do we know when we're well versus not well, right? So what are some of the things that I notice about myself, about my thoughts, about my relationships with others, my sleeping, eating? So just taking maybe about 30 seconds to think about, where am I right here, right now? And then how do I know? What are times that I'm well versus not well? And how do I know the difference? As we operate from this awareness, knowledge, skills model, kind of in the field that I work in, of how aware are we of these, of ourselves and these different things? What's the knowledge, which we've heard a lot about self-care and wellness. So today we'll review some things that you might already know, but get into the little bit of the nitty-gritty details. How does that apply to my life? How does that apply to patients that I work with, supervisees? And then the skills model. So, okay, so what does that look like? How can I apply this into my life? Which I hear some of you in the chat box saying, okay, so what does this mean for me? How can I do this? And I love this quote from Carl Rogers of, I've always been better at caring for others and looking after others than I have in caring for myself. One of the first things we do when we're busy is throw out our wellness and self-care, and sometimes put others, either personally in our own lives or professionally, ahead of that. Even this morning, I had a ton of things to do, and I wanted to go for a short walk, and I was like, nope, I need to call these references, do this stuff. And then I said, no, I have to practice what we preach. And so I said, I can call those references later, and I'm going to get outside for about 15 minutes. And so it's prioritizing, which we already know, and yet can be so challenging at times. And so hopefully today, this can be a reminder, remembering, and also walking away with some skills for us to do. So if we look at wellness and self-care, we look at, wellness versus, there's so many different definitions. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through different models of wellness. And so we can explore that, each of us individually, and then looking at, again, it's this like multidimensional. So then how does this impact, or how can I use this with patients and clients? And then also, self-care is what people do for themselves to maintain your health and wellness, or not do, right? Sometimes it's, and I put this in here, no, period, is a complete sentence. So sometimes it's stepping back from things is what helps us in our self-care. And then wellness, one of my favorite definitions is this way of being. It's not that we achieve this wellness and then we're there forever. I wish that was the case, right? It's this constant ebb and flow. And so how do we work towards and actively enhance our wellness at different times in our life? How do we integrate our mind, body, our spirit, right? And how do we, this optimal state of being and living? And so what that looks like for some of us can look very different for another. And so looking at, and I appreciate, and some people are sharing a little bit of where they're at right now, in the middle ground, I think one participant was just sharing. So looking at, and you already are aware of some of this research, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, especially during COVID-19 and the pandemic. There's a growing awareness for the need to protect healthcare workers, nurses, frontline clinicians. There are higher levels and consequences, even now, even before the pandemic, for this profession and healthcare field. And then we know the consequences to burnout. We know that increase in substance use. We know that malpractice. We know safety concerns. We know our own mental health. All of these things come back to our wellness and self-care. And then understanding a lot of the stressors, which you all would understand more than me. Like I said, volunteering with hospice, especially over and during this pandemic, but I was only in there once a week. You're in there every day with the short staff, the increase of risk and safety, so many unknowns. being short-staffed, right? Your own losses, seeing other people, the isolation and the toll on individuals and patients, not being able to say goodbye, not being able to connect with families, with aging patients, things going on in your own life, right? At home, in the world at large, the losses from the pandemic that you're facing, both death and non-death. If you have children at home, right, with schooling and the hybrid and all of the adjustments, in addition to a really stressful and really rewarding field that you're in, right? And it's not just within the individual. When we talk about self-care and wellness, we also need to look at the systems, the agencies, the environments, the policy, the training support that impact us in our different roles that we work in the healthcare professions. And so there's a lot of different suggestions and research will say out there, right? So more time and space that you need to grieve, more breaks, training, recognition, all of this stuff, right? Quality time with patients and families, how to debrief. And so looking at that, but also knowing that there are some real challenges in some of the agency settings and systems that we're in right now due to the healthcare and due to the pandemic. There's a great article that specific to counselors that talks about fellow travelers during COVID. And so how we're in the same exact situation as our clients and patients, fearful, loved ones, the community at large, worried about our health security, these uncharted, waters, territories. We don't know what will bring today, tomorrow. And so how that impacts our work as these fellow travelers during the COVID is something that those in the healthcare profession can really understand. And it's really challenging to communicate or relate to those, some that are not in it. And so I'm going to check I'm not in the, okay, thanks for that, Jenny. I'm not in the slideshow thing. So let me say from current slide. Okay, so this is some information that we already know. So how and why do we stay well, right? It's part of our code of ethics in all of our healthcares, right? We know that it can lead to burnout, but we also know there's ethical and safety issues if we're not well. All of these things listed here make sense. We know this, right? Sleep, exercise, nutrition, our environment, our emotional regulation awareness. We said about mindfulness, calming and breathing activities, connection, right? Showing up today with people that you work with, carving space to do mindful activities, to talk about wellness, to practice wellness. We started this faculty time here where it's like, where we had tea to just sit and talk about how we are doing, because so many meetings are based on students, based on this, based on clients. And it's like, what about us that are helping others in the field? Also, what about our hope? I was talking with another healthcare professional yesterday. He's a massage therapist, and he's like talking about how do we have hope in these times? And he's like, I haven't given up hope yet. And he was like, ... but I feel like I'm getting close to it. And so how do we install that hope? And then how do we have compassion and kindness for our patients, right? When sometimes they're wearing very thin, but also for ourselves. How do we treat ourselves with compassion when maybe we can't do what we typically want to do, or a competence level, or we're struggling because we're short-staffed, or we're really having a hard time in our own loss, supporting these other clients and patients in their loss. And then humor when appropriate. And so it's how do we, those of us today, those of us watching at a later date, how are we active participants in our self-care? What are we doing or not doing, including during the grief process, to help ourselves and also to help our patients, students, clients, depending on your role, because I know there's a multidisciplinary approach here. And so one thing that a lot of questions that I get about, working in grief and loss is, oh, this person's the expert, or ask them what to do during grief to stay well as you're grieving. And a lot of times I go back, well, what has helped you before during difficult times? It's not that we need a whole new set of skills when we talk about grieving different losses. It's what are some things that help us, that help kind of calm, soothe us, right? Who are people, where are places, what are activities or things that has helped us in the past? And then also knowing what doesn't help us, or who are people that maybe might activate as opposed to kind of release or connect for me. And that's important. And again, all these things are way easier said than done. It makes sense, but is like, it sounds good in theory, but really hard in times in practice. And so thinking about, what are times that things haven't worked out that you've tried? And then it's also like, what are things that we're already doing well that maybe we're not stopping to notice or acknowledge that within ourselves and also with our patients and clients? And how do we build that up to enhance our strengths that are already there, as opposed to saying, okay, what's wrong? How do we fix it? It's what is going well and how can we build up with that? And how can that, flow over into these other aspects? And so thinking about this is really important in the work that we do. And I'm going to show, this is, let me see. Oh, there it is. This is a little bit of an older article that I use a lot in my training and in my practice, this healthy tree metaphor. Even in the slide before, it saw the word like self-care and put in a tree in there. But the healthy tree metaphor of well-being, right? This is something that's pretty common to us. We've heard before. But what I like about it is it's very simple and it kind of reminds me of this balance of times. So it's this tree is kind of split into a personal and professional side. What are risk and protective factors, both internally and then also externally in the environment that I'm working, the agency, the system that I'm in? And what are some things going on in my own life with my own grief and loss, with my own kind of mental health, with my own family situation, and how is that impacting me working and connecting with patients? And then we've talked a little bit about, and you all are familiar with in the work that you do, compassion fatigue, which is always been there, but even more so now in the times of the pandemic, and vicarious trauma. And so how sitting with and watching and being a part of some of these aging traumatic experiences of people not being connected, and how and when and why people are dying, and what does that look like, and how that impacts us. And then we think about this tree and it talks about, so it starts from the roots. So theory and spirituality. So theory in terms of your practice, right? How you engage with patients, how you conceptualize, and then spirituality. This is a large part of wellness. And we talk about different wellness wheels that I'll show you and that you may be familiar with. A lot of it starts with the spirituality, this essence of self, right? So in thinking about in one sentence, so right now, wherever you are, in one sentence, how would you define the meaning of life? And so this part of ourselves, however you identify meaning, spirituality, or maybe a specific religious affiliation, how are we finding meaning in everyday life? And then what does that look like in our practice? And then looking at hope and strength within there. So I don't know if anybody wants to share that in the chat box or not, but how would you in one sentence describe the meaning of life? The meaning of your life as well. So what has been going on in the world? How are we making sense of that? Where do we see hope and strength in others and human, right? In the world at large is really important when we think about our wellness. And it's really, wellness has really evolved, right? Aristotle said, it's, nothing in excess to, we've looked at like this, kind of in the Middle Ages, this mind body. And then we looked at World Health Organization in the 1950s says it's not just the absence of disease. So we've really kind of evolved over time of how and what does this look like in many different aspects. And so this essential spirituality of self is a big part of it. And a lot of times we're in the helping profession because this is part of what we believe about the world of connecting with others, of giving back. And that gives us the sense of purpose. And then where that can be a source of stress and burnout, then we question a lot of that and looking at the world at large. So if we look at the roots and the theory and spirituality, then we look at the soil, which is a metaphor for the relationships. And we know this is important in any type of rehabilitation in individuals is the social relationships, both personally and professionally, and also with yourself, right? The intrapersonal relationship with yourself, yours within your friends group, within your family, and then also professionally. So looking at what are your relationships with your coworkers, with your peers, with your students, with your bosses, with those within your agencies and organizations. How are they helping or hindering your wellness? And then looking at, and then it has these branches of activities, right? So work and social, so it's divided into those. So what are self-care activities? So things you're actually doing, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a couple minutes. And then what are you doing as part of your work? So this is part of, right, continuing education credits, trainings, right, debriefings with those that you work with, conferences and so forth. And then what are you doing that you enjoy outside of work, hobbies, self-care, so on and so forth, moving forward. Let's see, we got a little, yeah, and so I'm reading a little bit in the chat box. Yeah, making sense of it all and finding meaning, like the chaos, Amy said. Absolutely. I mean, I think so many of us are struggling like in this, like, what does it all mean? And volunteer, yeah, absolutely. Changing climate, preserving nature, Erica shares about, yeah, all of those are so important. And so how do we still care about these things without it taking a huge toll on us? And we are seeing, right, we're seeing a high turnover. We're seeing a lot of people leaving the healthcare profession, the helping profession, the education because of this, right? It's what drew us in. And now for some of us, it's really burning us out. There's many different models of wellness. This is one SAMHSA talks a little bit about. And again, so looking at, so we've talked a little bit about the social aspect. We know that that's part of every part of rehabilitation, individuals. So what's our support system? We talked a little bit about spiritual, occupational, so where we work. And we know that we've worked at certain settings or institutions that have been more supportive of our wellness versus others. The physical, and that's a part where people a lot of times focus on first is, so, okay, I need to change my diet, right? Working out, how am I sleeping? That's huge. That's a really important movement, maybe for some. Intellectual, so what am I doing to enhance my creativity? How am I growing and learning? And environmental, so someone just talked a little bit about that. So what's going on within my environment, within my community's environment, with the at large in nature? And so how does that support you? One of my things is like, when in doubt, get out. I always feel better when I go outside. I never feel worse when I do. And so how do we connect to these different things that we know are important? Financial, right? So for some of us, there's financial wellness of, I am working multiple jobs to make ends meet for this, or, you know, not feeling like we're compensating the helping profession like others that might be in corporate or other. And so how does that make sense? And so am I working more hours or taking on extra clients or patients because my financial needs are higher then? And what's the toll of that, let's say, on my emotional aspect? So what emotions am I feeling? And then how am I regulating those emotions and managing those emotions? Is all important. Here's another, this is one I used to do a study abroad in Ireland. We're hoping to get that up and getting in Mental Health Ireland. So they say for mental health, again, connecting, taking notice, which we've talked about, keep learning, being active in this aspect of giving. And a lot of us give a lot in the work that we do. And then what are other ways that fill us and not just drain us? And so this is another, there's tons of models. There's like 6 dimensions of wellness. There's 9 dimensions of wellness, but you'll see a lot of overlap. This is one that I use a lot, and it's specific to the counseling profession of, it's called the Indivisibles of Self model. So again, you can see some very similar things, you know, the coping, stress management, what do we do for fun? This creative part, which is positive humor, and then, you know, physical and then essential is not just our spiritual, but gender, cultural identity. And how do we express that? And then if you look at the left, it's what's the context that we live in and how are they supporting or actually not for our wellness? Because we think a lot about what is it about me? What can I do? What am I not doing? And a lot of it's we need to look at, you know, again, how do we identify in certain aspects of our identity or culture? And then what's the community's neighborhood? What's the education policies? What are some, you know, we know access to healthcare isn't equitable, right? What are the politics? How is that influencing social media? All of these things impact our wellness. So it's not just within the individual, same within our patients, right? And sometimes I think we can be really hard on ourselves of, why can't I just do this or that? Or but it's also looking at the context and the social, political, and environment that we live in and how that it helps or hinders our self-care and wellness. And so we know too, the intersectionality of wellness, grief, and culture. And so here are some aspects when we think of culture and identity. And if you look at these for yourself, but also looking at patients that we work with. So how do I identify in my spiritual religious identity? Like, what is my age? How does that fit in, right? When you're working with the aging population, socioeconomic background, how is that impacting you and your clients and their access to healthcare, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, ethnic racial identity, previous trauma, certain threats to well-being, your language, ability, disability. So all of these things influence. So thinking about how do these different aspects and identity influence your wellness? And so thinking a little bit about where are you in the majority, the minority, and in what environments and contexts are you in that really enhance or might actually take away from your wellness? And thinking about how we enhance resiliency, and then also thinking about the grief process. And so all of these I see as an intersectionality between what can help in others and hinder in another. And so looking at these unique factors is really important in work. So what I want us to have us do is I'm gonna have us think about this wellness activity. And so looking at, so you can see there, this is a wellness wheel that I shared of, and I ask you at the beginning on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you feel that you are? But I want you to think about in each of these different aspects. So if I pull this up, and I'm going to actually share my screen again, but I'm going to share something different. I started filling this one out. So I'm going to share my screen here. So if we look at this, and this is on the PowerPoint as well, is looking at, so this has social, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, occupational, environmental, and physical. And you could divide each of these up a little bit differently, but I want you to think, spend a couple minutes looking at, so as a scale of 1 to 10, looking at the social aspect, where would I rate myself? 10 being the most well I've been, 1 being the least well as it relates to my social wellness. You could even divide that pie into 2, and 1 could be like personal, and 1 could be like professional relationships. And then, so I'm going to share this with you also, you can do this, but I want to share an activity that I've done with clients, patients, students, and then you can color in. So let's say in social wellness, I said, it's pretty low right now. It's about a 3 out of 10. So then I'm going to color in 3 rings, right? And then if you look at the physical aspect, 1 to 10 in terms of where am I in my physical wellness? Well, actually that's an area I feel like I'm doing really well in. And so I'm going to color in 8 out of 10. And so what this does is it has you break up wellness into different pieces of it, all right? And we know that they're all interconnected. And so I want you to spend a couple minutes here thinking about how would I rate myself in these different areas. And there's many different models of wellness, so you can put in ones that fit, like maybe financial, as opposed to, or adding that in or taking that out as opposed to intellectual. And so figuring out, how do you conceptualize your own wellness? And looking at it as a scale from 1 to 10 in these different areas. So I'm going to give you about a minute or so here. To look at this, and if you're at home, you can draw this, or you can just scale each one from 1 to 10. Working with people, they can also, some people might be more tactile. So you could also, you could use stones to say, okay, here's 10 here. If someone's visually impaired. So again, you can make adjustments according to different ability levels. And while you do that, I have to plug in my computer because it's about to die. If people want to share in the chat box too, like, what do you notice as you're filling this out, as you're thinking about these different aspects? So we've talked about got a mute view because my computer is not working at my desk. So I have to plug it in here. Okay, so what do people notice about scaling these from 1 to 10? Where are areas that you are the strongest? So I want people to spend a little bit of time. Yeah, Amy, thank you for sharing that. It's easier to break down how to improve. So whenever doing this activity, people are typically zoom into, where am I not well? Where am I like a 1? Where is it not colored at all on my wellness wheel, right? What do I need to do? How do I need to improve? But if we look at, and we try and work in a strength-based model, we say, what am I already doing well? And how can I continue to do that? Yeah, so Lee's saying like really negatively impacted pieces I never realized before this activity. And so really stopping to break down these different aspects, scaling from 1 to 10, or visually having a representation of it, or even, like I said, tangible for some people, helps you zoom out a little bit and see. What else have people noticed as they're doing this? Where are we strong? What are we doing? How did we showed up today, right? And that's one thing that we always say is like, that's one of the hardest things to do. So what got us here today, right? And thinking not just for ourselves, but also with our patients. What has you keep going? What keeps you, drives you, right? What were you already able to do today is really important for us to remember. Yeah, so Leslie's saying that it's the weaker areas that are weaker with the amount of time or lack thereof dedicated to those areas, right? So how can we prioritize or spend a little bit more time in this area, knowing if we can enhance this one area, it can trickle over into the other aspects of it. And so Nikki's saying there's certain pressure points that we focus on, right? So we focus on, and I think like, if we look at sociocultural things, a lot of times when I do the wellness wheel, a lot of women really focus on, okay, my diet and how I look and weight, so on and so forth. So I'm focusing on that, what I'm eating, in addition to looking at what are these other aspects of my life, emotional aspects, social aspects, what's going on in other parts of the home, and how might that impact it? And then also, what's the expectation as women, as how we look, and so on and so forth? What's the social media impact about that? But looking at, where do we focus? And then how can we zoom out a little bit and look at other areas of our rights? And Mary Louise is saying too, increasing our awareness forces you to come to grips with areas of improvement, right? So step 1 is we want to be really aware. And if we look at a holistic model, for ourselves and also for our patients, we want to look at all of these different aspects. And again, there's so many different models. So, I have this wellness wheel that's as part of the PowerPoint to share, but again, feel free to adjust and adapt that. And I got permission from when I was working in Idaho. They're like, yeah, use this wheel, do whatever, as long as it helps people with their wellness, and be creative at it. And so patients and yourself can look at what are different aspects that could be really important to me. And so thinking about how do we apply this to others is so important. So coming up with what's an area that I've already done and I'm doing really well. I want everyone to think of to keep doing that. And then thinking of 1 or 2 small things that are realistic and feasible for you to focus on this week. And so we know, like, working with SMART goals, what's, specific, measurable, achievable, and also like realistic and in this time-oriented thing. So thinking about breaking down a couple small goals for yourself this week to thinking about what can I do? What can I do for me, for you? And then this also helps us think, okay, so how can I then apply this to patients and clients that I'm working with, right? And maybe we're focused on this one aspect. And so how can we spend some time on these other aspects of this client or of this patient? So I'm gonna share my screen again and see, let's see from current slide, what else? So I put this in the PowerPoint too, so I copied that into there, the wellness wheel. I think, in resiliency, we've heard a lot about this. How do we support our well-being at a vulnerable time in our own grief process? Really, there are no rules, do what you need, right? And what's helpful to me may not be for you. And for one patient, may be harmful, but for another, it may not be. So it's so individual with how we identify our own cultures and then the different environments that we're in. And then, this idea of post-traumatic growth for not only those that we work with, but also for ourselves in the profession. And I think we hear resiliency that's thrown around a lot, but I really like this explanation of it. It's not an armor that protects us from pain, but enables us to feel it, right? Feel and but not drown in the grief, but be able to move through the grief so we can also feel joy and awe and love. So it's feeling a little bit of it all. And that's, our fields are, I mean, we're all drawn to it because it really fulfills us and fills our heart, but it also can break our heart. And so how do we balance both of those? And how do we be in the present moment? Like we said, how do we savor those moments and those connections that we have? This is a free character strengths test. And actually one of the questions that we had that I want to get to too is, and so I think you just have to put your email to it, but it gives you like the top 20 strengths. And it's really great to just look at those and remind myself, okay, so here's some of my strengths. And then how am I using these in my life right now? Or how am I not? And so anyways, little assessments like that, I think can be really helpful. I mean, obviously you want to be mindful of the validity and reliability and all that stuff, but it can be, something that can help you and also with clients looking at things. So here's just some, and I know we're kind of short on time and I want to make sure that we have enough for questions. So how do we express our grief and enhance our wellness? So again, some of these things overlap with before, like movement, yoga, dance, physical activities really help us, some of us, right? Music chronology. So how do we write grief lyrics? How do we use music? How are we playing music, right? Like in my office, I like to play that a lot, and that kind of helps me, kind of in my mind space. And then sometimes I forget to do that. And then I remember. Alive and Salve, which is a great documentary. Maybe some of you have seen that, about the use of music with the elder population and individuals with Alzheimer's. We also know in like tactile painting, coloring, creating. These are things that are not new. It's just a reminder of what do you like to do, what costs you, or can you try something a little bit different? New hobbies and learning new things is a part of our wellness. And then I put in the ecotherapy, which is so important, our connection to nature. Some of you have talked about. It's my motto, when in doubt, get out, like aromatherapy. So how can we do that? Energy work, massages, Tai Chi. I love this, like grief recipes. So what's your recipe through loss? And talking about that, sharing, creating those, making those can be really helpful to people. Digital storytelling, using photography. I have these great cards right here. Ooh, journey through grief when I was working in Malaysia, and they have just a ton of this helps with clients too that might be nonverbal, and even for myself sometimes or with clients, if you don't have words, like this is different photography, either yourself or with like there's a lot of different decks and cards that you can use with clients. Tell your story. For those of you too, as one of the organizations I'm on, Learning to Live, we invite people to tell their stories. And we'd love to hear about some of your stories with grief and loss yourself and with the people that you work with. Finding communities to share and support one another. I'm a counselor, so I always advocate for counseling. Groups are really helpful. There's a link here of like, what would you tell your younger self about grief? So maybe your writing could be, I think when we play a little bit with past, current, and future self, so you can be creative with that, poems, stories. How do we express our faith or our spirituality or our meaning in life? Is it devoting more time to reading, prayer, rituals, journal, podcasts? So what is it that really fuels you? And then, like I said, reaching out. And then sometimes we need to do like nothing. We need to like I said, say no, have this respite, kind of relax a little bit. Because we're constantly on the go. So here's just some takeaways and for some questions. So how do we enhance our wellness now? Keep doing what you are already doing. How do you honor and recognize your own grief as a human being experiencing all of these different losses pre-pandemic, which the pandemic can activate, during the pandemic, while you're trying to support and take care of other people? That is really, really challenging. And And so we have to find times, find our own supports, supervision, training, workshops, advocacy. Maybe it's like, we need to change some things in our work environment. We need to have some policies, like what can we do? And then also, how can we talk with our higher ups, right? So what is it about talking to my boss about, hey, this is going to be helpful to me and to the students here, or what can we do in these different organizations? And then what's your own boundaries, personal and professional? I think it's hard. We can be pulled into it, tugs on our heartstrings when we're short staffed, when people need help. And it's hard to say no. But what are our limits? And so how do we do all of this, and how do we support our patients' wellness during difficult times as well? And I love this book. I don't know, I keep putting this in my different presentations. It's a very cute book, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. And I think being in the helping profession, I love these two. What's the bravest thing you've ever said? Asked the boy. Help, said the horse. Asking for help isn't giving up, said the horse. It's refusing to give up. And you all are, doing so much at such a difficult time that, knowing that you're not alone, knowing that there's a lot of other people and groups to support you, I think is really important. And so I think I got it right to the where I need to stop, maybe a little over, but I wanted to, I know that was a lot at you, but hopefully you got some time to reflect, and a little bit of questions that you might have. And actually I might answer, this is a great question that was posed earlier about, at a leadership level, how do you support knowing that there's high turnover with staff, burnout? What do we do from that end? And I said, and I'm curious to hear other thoughts of those in leadership positions as well. But one thing that we've been doing, and I think needs to start earlier, is more prevention. And so I teach in the undergrad and grad. And so I teach in rehab and human services. Some might go into nursing, some might go into OT, PT. They'll work at different healthcare facilities. Is starting now talking about wellness. So my grad program, like 20 years ago, this wasn't words, lingo that was used. Now they're like, oh, we hear that all the time, but do you know what that means? And what does that look like? So in classes now in undergrad, in our college, in our program, we're having them doing this activity like the wellness wheel we did today. They are designing, as part of their assignments in class, are to create a wellness plan to start now before they're in the field. So they're aware of this stuff. So they're building up some of their strengths and enhancing it. So they're starting to know, okay, how do I know when I'm not well or well, right? Like, oh, I'm getting really activated when this happens, or this goes out the window. Then I know, hey, that's a flag for me. I need to focus on myself. And trainings, right? Focused on trainings, I think, are really important. And having check-ins during our meetings. Like we say, that's really important to do self-care and wellness, but then I'm in 2.5-hour faculty department meetings, and it's like one thing after the other jammed in, and we're all leaving like more overwhelmed than we came in. So how do we do that? Anyways, okay, you talk to ask me questions.
Yeah, so Dr. K, I understand you go by Dr. K
Yeah.
sometimes. First and foremost, on behalf of the CGNE leadership team, as well as all of our audience members here today, I want to thank you so much for a very informative, interesting, thought-provoking seminar. I think you've given us a lot of things to reflect on, to consider in improving our own self-care and wellness. And I wanted to ask you first to help us understand, we did, this is part 2 of the Speaking Grief, and I wanted our audience to know a little bit about why we kind of did this format. The first part, we provided a foundation of understanding around current theory and practice about grief and loss. But this part, we decided to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves as nurses, healthcare providers, family members, friends, community members, as we're providing support to others that are experiencing grief, as well as ourselves. And of course, over the last couple of years, we've all experienced so much. Share with us a little bit about your connection to the Speaking Grief project, and what that's meant to you.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been involved. So when I started here at Penn State in 2013, I started teaching the grief and loss class. Like I said, I've been working with hospice for the past 20 years. And in my grad program, when I worked in Colorado and Idaho, and also in Ohio, I worked a lot with kids and families going through grief and loss. And then I've always worked with the aging population as well in hospice. So I have like such a, professionally, but also personal ties to grief and loss throughout my life. And I see it, I see all of actually counseling, the work we do, as a form of grief and loss, not just death, but non-death related, right? And I think the pandemic really highlighted that. And so for me, I've been involved in the community in several different organizations. And then even at the level of the national level, next week I'm presenting at a conference, we're trying to have grief competencies for our counseling, for our accreditation curriculum, to infuse that throughout for trauma, for grief, for death, but also non-death related losses. And so for me, that's just a big part of who I am and how I'm involved in our communities, in our schools. But then being connected to, the university and WPSU, I was part of an advisory board for this documentary. And we've done some engagements, speaking engagements, and presenting in different classworks or community at the local or national level to really bring awareness of grief and the differences within how people grieve, maybe a similar loss, but because of some of these things we talked about today, our individual culture, the environment that we're in, how our own wellness, right, our own relationships, it looks really differently. And so part of my connection with Speaking Grief was to be able to share other people's stories of how that looks, and to spread this awareness. And again, like this knowledge of different types of losses, how it impacts us differently. And then also the skill part, which I was focusing more on today, was the wellness, stay well while we're grieving, right? There's not this whole new set of skills that we do when we're grieving. It's remembering these areas that are strong in our life and continuing to enhance these other areas that we might want to focus a little bit more time on. So, so that's a little bit of how and why I got to be really,
for the person that is experiencing grief and loss, they need support around supporting their wellness.
Yes.
So one of the probably best things we could do is offer to take a walk with that person.
Yes.
Or, check in with them about how they're sleeping or how they're eating, and, avoid giving advice or kind of becoming preachy about it. But I think, finding ways to provide support around it.
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, sometimes it's these really small things that actually do mean a lot in our lives and in our patients' lives. And so what is it? And I think that's the really hard part about COVID, right? Is like, so many things were taken away, right? Like we were doing window visits. I was like, people weren't allowed to eat with one another. And that was a big social component. And so it's like, what are little things that we can do that can help enhance their wellness, right? As we're enhancing our own. And I think that and I see Logan's question too, which things change day to day and week to week as we relate to our wellness. And we think of that, and you can absolutely track this activity and other activities. Again, adjust and adapt it to your patients or to your needs. And maybe your patient, maybe there's like 3 or 4, right? And it could be more of a tactile thing, or I've done it with, with kids or others, or people that like food, where they can eat out of these 10, M&Ms, how many of the wellness? I mean, so there's very different ways you can do it, but this wellness wheel looks really different when you do it. Like, how I do it in the morning could be completely different with what it looks like at night. And so absolutely, you can use this to track over time. It could be week by week, it could do a day, or, even like a really future focused one is, I'll say, so how do you view your wellness in a week from now? If I ask you about your wellness, right? What are some things that you can move it up just one notch, right? So if we say to 1 to 10, and right now you might be a 6 in, let's say, like the social aspect. So what's one thing you could do between now and next time I see you that can move that 6 to a 7, right? So, I mean, you can be really creative in the ways that you can scale it and also use it over time. Absolutely. And yes, so I'll absolutely share the PowerPoints, and you can use that wellness wheel. Please use that. The people that shared it with me were like, please spread the love with wellness.
So Katie, when you were talking about mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
it reminded me of, and just being present in the moment and kind of transitioning from one thing to the other. I'm fortunate to serve on a committee for Foxdale Village.
Oh, yes.
Because it's a Quaker community,
Mm.
they start all of their meetings
Mhm.
with a moment of silence, which is really cool because it is a way of, usually you're kind of hustling to the meeting and, you're needing to transition from what you were just doing to being present for that purpose of that meeting. And it's amazing how it does just calm you and focus you and get you prepared for. So it's a really wonderful practice that they do in that community.
Yes, and I think, and I love that. And I think, I started doing these 1 minute mindfulness in the pandemic when I was transitioning to Zoom. And I was like, everything's all over the place. And the students were like, that's really great. Thanks for doing that. I'm like, I think it was just as much for me as it was for you all. And then I've kept it. I'm still doing it because I'm like, just 1 minute, 1 minute. Can make a difference, like a huge difference, just like what you shared. Yeah, absolutely. And so how can we find that, right? We might not be able, although there's this great, it says, if you don't have time to meditate for 10 minutes, you should be meditating for an hour. But I'm like, but just 1 minute, 1 minute. So I have a whole list of 1 minute mindfulness slips that I can just do in my office. I can do in my car. I can do in class, and it's just like, ground me for 1 minute. That's what I can give right now. And I think, Leslie, your thought and comment is one of the most challenging things is when we cannot engage with our grief at certain times. Yeah, absolutely. It's like we're saying, I see you grief, here you are, and I'm honoring you, and I'm not going to completely shove it down, but really I've got to put this to the side for now to be able to focus here. And then it's carving time to focus on it at a later date. Because if we're not, then we just keep piling it up, stuffing it down. And then, grief, two-headed monster turns into a 10-headed monster. And then it seeps out in ways that, that manifest in our sleep and our bodies and our thoughts and so on and so forth. It's such a fine balance of feeling it, not drowning in it, while we're supporting other people and encouraging them to, express in a way and, not to deny it, but to be with it, but to not have it, move through you, but instead you move through grief. It's really challenging, and you're doing it, we're doing it. And I really appreciate and value all the work that you all are doing. And I know I really appreciate it, and the roles that I've been in the healthcare profession. And yes, I want to say thank you to all of you as well. It's not an easy job, and have some.
And we want to thank you again to you, Katie, for this amazing presentation, for spending time with us today, to giving us a lot to think about in terms of our own self-care and wellness, so that we can better support others as well. So thank you so much for sharing this presentation today. As a reminder, the evaluation tool is required for RNs seeking contact hours, but we ask all participants to complete it within 1 week. For your convenience, the link to the tool has been placed into the chat, so you can do it now, or it will be emailed to you within 24 hours. Again, we ask that you do it within a week. Thank you so much for completing that for us. Please join us next week, October 7th, for delirium screening and management from two perspectives, co-presented by Dr. Andrea Silner and Leandra Davis. Thank you to everyone, to Dr. K, as well as our audience, for participating in today's seminar. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.